quick knot to tie. Tied. When you want it off, you just pull the tag end. Okay, now let me bring it a little closer. Right? Hey, it's Greg here with Outdoors on the Cheap, and I thought I today would do a video on the 5 knots that I use most often. Really, it's very rare that I need anything other than these. And even some of these I don't use all the time. There's probably 3 of them that I use most often. So I'll kind of go in order of how often I use them as well. But basically with these 5 knots, you can deal with just about everything that comes up when you're out in the woods, camping, fishing, hunting, doing bushcraft sort of stuff, okay? And I'll start with the caveat of, this is notwithstanding the overhand knot and the half hitch, because you know those are very, very basic knots. For those that know what those are, great. If you don't know what those are, I'll explain what those 2 knots are at the end of the video. But they're the 2 simplest knots there are, sort of thing, right? So I'm not going to count those. Of course, you got to know what an overhand knot is, and of course, you got to know what a half hitch is, and they're very useful. But anyway, let's get started. So let's start first with the knot I use the most. Okay, and that would be, I think it's called the pony knot. There's different names for it, so I'll Google this knot and I'll put all the names up on the screen here. I call it a pony knot because it's a knot, as far as I understand, used to tie up a pony to like a post. Okay, so let me take you to some sort of zoom in here a little bit and get near a tree, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. All right, let me just show you from a distance, and I'll do some zoomed in. Okay, so you want to tie something to a tree, you know, a guy line, a ridge line for a lean-to, whatever you need to tie onto a tree. You're tying a canoe to some, you know, stick that's on the shore just so it doesn't float away. Whatever, right? You want a quick, easy knot. And I should say all these knots except one are knots that are very easy to tie. They hold very well, and they come untied very easily because your line is precious, right? You keep cutting this stuff, all of a sudden you start losing length and then it becomes less useful. So with the pony knot, you just put it around the thing you want to tie it to, and you make an overhand knot, okay, in the tag end around the working end. The tag end is the shorty, the working end's the one that's really long, okay? So you make a overhand knot around the working end with the tag end. And all I do is you just put a bend through the hole, okay? You got a little loop like that. You can tighten that up, good. And then it's a slip knot, basically. It ties like that, right? And that'll hold, here, I'm 6'4", 215-pound man. Put everything I got on that, right? It's not coming off, okay? And it can be windy and pulled and you know, lots of things can go on with this, right? Won't slip off. Right? Some knots hold, but like a reef knot, you keep going like this, it'll come out, right? Anyway, all I got to do is pop this when I don't want it anymore, and it's off, right? So again, it's a quick knot to tie. Tied. When you want it off, you just pull the tag end. Okay, now let me bring it in a little closer, right, so you can see it in detail. All right, so honestly, if you learn one knot from this video, I would come away with this one, okay? So you've gone around the post, right? The knot goes underneath, goes over, and you got a circle like that, right? See that? And you just feed a little bend up through, pull her tight, right? And it just comes in like that. Put that a little bit higher up so it's in the center of your screen there. See, it just goes in like that, right? And you got the tag end here. I think for tying up a pony, because they tend to bite on these, you actually put this through the loop like that, so they can't mess it up too bad. But anyway, you're not tying up a pony, you're just tying stuff to trees and stuff, right? So when you want that, so you always have that loop, and when you want it out, you just pull the tag end, pop, and it's out, right? So it's a ridiculously fast and easy knot to tie. Not hard to learn. Do this about 20 times in a row, you know, and you're an expert and you're a wizard and you look like a, you know, when you're out with other people, you look like a master, right? Holds really well, comes undone really well, right? So that's the pony knot, or what I call the pony knot. Okay, it's just a slip knot with a bend in the end. Like that, a lot of the knots I'm going to show you have this sort of loop bend type deal. All right, so this is probably the knot I use most often. Because often when you're out in the woods, you're tying stuff to trees. Okay? All right, next most common knot I use, I would say, would be the, I'll have to use a different string for this. I'll show you on this knot so you can see, but it's called the jam knot, okay? And it's the easiest knot ever to tie. But this here one, the jam knot, is what I would call a permanent knot. So I'm going to show you 5 knots today. The first one was a temporary knot. It comes undone very easily. This one here, once you tighten it up, you pretty much got to cut it loose. All right, so you just put your line around the thing you want to tie to, and then you make an overhand knot the same way you would with the pony knot, but instead of putting a bend through the overhand, you just do that. And then what you do is you tie another overhand knot on the tag end, like that. Okay? When you crank these together, what happens is that you see that there on your screen? When you start cranking these together, what happens is that little overhand knot, stop knot, starts to move towards the loop, and it binds up on it, okay? And the harder you pull, the tighter that gets, okay? Now, it does come undone if you do it that way. Another way to tighten it is if you, before you start cranking down, right, and tightening it, before you do that. So if you just do it like this, you can actually pull back on it and it'll come. You can't really untie these once you've gone really tight, but you can back it off, right? So you can use it as sort of like a reusable knot if you're tying, a bundle of sticks or something like that, right? Or different kinds of gear, right? You can use it to, right? You'd hold this, and it basically, it's like a slip knot, but it gets tighter and tighter and tighter the harder you pull. Can be reused. But the knot will, you pretty much got to cut that out if you put some real tension on it. But if you were going to use this to like lash 2 things together, I would say, instead of a nail, like if you were, if you needed to build a ladder, and there's a special knot for doing ladders I'm not going to cover here, but basically if you had, lots of rope, like you had some of this bank line kicking around, right? You can put a lot of this in your pocket, right? You can carry a lot more bank line than you can paracord. I know bushcraft guys always talk about paracord, but bank line is, I tend to carry more of that. It's got a really, 200-pound braking strength, and you can carry, 100 yards of it in your back pocket sort of thing. So it's handy, and it'll do just about everything you need, right? Anyway, if you want this knot to be absolutely permanent, what you do, I don't know how well you can see that, but on this side, right, you can see how this is moving back and forth, right, like that. On this side of it, you feed the working end through, and you put it down like this. You're basically putting a half hitch behind it, okay? Now what you do, you just leave that hang, is you tighten up on this, okay? Get that really tight. I don't have it really tight right now because I want to undo the knot. You tighten that up really good, and you hold it down with your thumb, and then you pull the working end, right, and basically secure the half hitch. This is twisted up for some reason. It's not behaving. Let me just get that twist out. All right, bit of a twist in there for some reason. Whatever. All right, so let's do it over again. All right, so your cranker tight. Okay, like so. Keep this over there. You crank her down. Then you hold it down with your thumb. And then you bring that over. See that? Behind it. okay? And then you'd cut that off, okay? And when you do that, you're basically got, you're lashing two sticks together for whatever reason. It basically functions like a nail, okay? And it's not really comes into its own when you're using bank line, tarred bank line, which is great stuff if you can find it. You can, of course, you could buy it on the internet and so on, but every once in a while, I've actually been able to find it at the dollar store, if you can believe that. So let me just show you. Let me grab a stick here, and I'll show you the jam knot using tarred bank line. All right, let's say I got two sticks I want to attach together for whatever reason. I'm, building some sort of ladder or deer blind, or, erecting some sort of structure that's got to be permanent. And I don't want this to come out, okay? So with my bank line, all right, just let that hang. All I got to do is put that around it, right? Tie the first overhand knot, and then tie the second overhand knot. Okay. Now I start cranking. Okay. Get it really tight. All right. Let's grab a knife here. So every time you make this knot, you're sacrificing line, but if you're using something like a bank line, it doesn't really matter because you'll have a lot of it, right? Anyway, now I've got that tightened up, and I want it to stay permanent, so I've just put the line through, make a half hitch, okay, and then just tighten it onto the knot like that. Then you cut that off, right? Then you've got, pretty tight, especially if you tie it like this and then turn it like that, it becomes extra tight, right? And then you attach this to the other thing, right, over here sort of thing, right? But that's a knot. There's no way to get that out, right? That is just permanent in all the ways that permanent is permanent. So it has to be cut, right, to remove it. So that's not a knot you can use with your, paracord, of course. But if you're tying something permanent, you're going to be losing lengths of paracord, which is precious and not. I don't find it to be cheap. So, if you're fixing two sticks to a tree that you're going to use to, make some sort of ladder or whatever, there is a special lashing knot, but the jam knot I find works just fine for that sort of thing, right? So you don't really need to learn all the different lashing knots. If you're willing to sacrifice a bit of line, but it's a tiny loop sort of thing, right? So you could make a ladder using jam knot just fine, and it'll tighten up really good and last, right? The stuff is tarred, so it handles the weather and so on and so forth, right? The third most typical knot I use, I got my string here, is what's called a lark's head, right? So for the lark's head, you just make a loop in your line. And you do that with the loop, right? That's it, right? You just take that end, bring it back, and you've got a really simple knot like that. Okay? Now, it's not the most useful knot in the world, but it's useful in certain instances. Let me show you. All right, let's say you've got, it's a great back saver knot. If you've got a length of rope that's 6 feet long or 12 feet long. I usually have different pieces of rope, different lengths of rope in my, in my kit, right? I'll have usually 7 hand spans of bank line. I have about 3 hand spans of this paracord. Then I'll have like 1 hand span of paracord like this. Okay, and it's really like there's lots of different uses for the lark's head, but one of the best is just if you're moving heavy stuff. This isn't heavy, but I'm just using this as an example. It's a back saver. I'm trying to drag a log through the woods, right? Instead of getting down on my, getting down and grabbing it and logging it along, if I just put a lark's head around it, it's a slip knot. It won't it'll tighten the harder I pull. Right, so instead of having to be down like this, and let's say this is really something really heavy, I can just give it a little yank like that. Right, so it's a very fast knot that, you know, comes off. It's basically not even a knot really, right? But it'll stay on really well. Okay, stays on really, really well. Now, what if I'm in a situation where I want to use a lark's head, but instead of doubling up the string, I want all my length, right? So so the instance I showed you before, I put the lark's head over something, right? Tighten it up, and I'm pulling on both strings, right? If I just pull on one of the strings, you know, with enough wiggling and so on and so forth, it can come loose. It will not hold if you're just pulling on one of the strings. It'll hold a bit, but it won't hold a lot. It won't hold reliably. Okay, so what if I'm in that situation where I need the length and I want to do a quick knot? And of course, in a situation like this, you can use a pony knot, but there's a trick with the lark's head, right? If I just put it on like this, right, I've got this little tiny tag end, right? And I mean, it'll hold, right? But if there's a lot of yanking and jostling and mucking around, it comes off, right? Right, it's not reliable. But if I take the lark's head, okay, when I make it, so I've made a lark's head here, and I call this a figure 8 lark's head. You just basically make a figure 8, right? And you put that over. This only works if you've got a post or a stick or, you know, something that you can get at the end, right? But I put that figure 8 over it, hold on both pieces and give it a good wiggle to cinch it down. Well, now I've got a knot that's very reliable, and I can use the length of the rope, right? But it's still very reliable because there's all kinds of friction going on there, right? We've basically doubled it up in the easiest way ever, right? That's a reliable knot. It'll last a long time. Won't come loose. Won't work itself loose. I don't know if it'll last forever, but you know what I mean? Much more than the other one, right? There's just a lot of friction there. But it comes apart, you know, dead easy, comes off, no matter how hard you pull on that, right? So let's just do that again. Make a loop, right? Make the lark's head, make a figure 8, and put it over. And you can make that as big as you want, right? You can put it over a tree or a branch off a tree. Right, you saw a branch off a tree and you use the leftover stump as sort of like a, you know, point of attachment point. Right, this I'm gonna pull as hard as I can here. Yeah. Okay, comes off like it was never even on there. Right, really easy. Okay, so that's what I call the figure 8 lark's head. Just a variation of lark's head. Another thing you can do with a lark's head is you can pop it over the thing, and you can just put a little half hitch bend behind it, and as long as you get that tight, it'll reinforce it. Okay, it will not come loose. So it's just a quick way of securing the lark's head. So there's, you know, a number of variations, right? You've got that figure 8 deal that I showed earlier, but just a simple lark's head like this, with a half hitch, the bend through the half hitch like that. That's not going anywhere, but it's nothing to untie that, right? No matter how hard you pull, that's going to be loose when you untie it. All right, so the other knot I use fairly often when you've got to attach a line between two objects. This could be a guy line for a tent or some sort of shelter, or a ridge line for a lean-to or a shelter, or if you're trying to tie something down in the back of a vehicle or roof racks or whatever. Okay, so you attach one end to one of the objects. I'm just going to use the pony knot here because it's so quick and easy and convenient, right? We've got that there. Now over here we just wrap it around the other object. It's a tree, okay? And you grab it in the middle and you make a loop like that, okay? And you grab the line on the side that's moving and you just pull through. You make a loop. I'm going to bring the camera in closer so you can see, but you make a loop, okay? Now all you got to do is pass the line through the loop, right? And crank it down. You can get that as tight as you want. Okay, and you just make a half hitch through there, and you got a nice tight line, right? If I come out tomorrow, you know, let's say this is a guy line holding part of my tent assembly in place, and I want to make it tighter, I just pop that loop out and tighten it some more, right? So you can adjust the tightness and you can make it tighter or looser as you need, right? And the great thing about the trucker's hitch is that when you don't want the knot anymore, that pops out no problem, right? And the loop also pops out, okay? So let me bring the camera a little closer so you can see the knot. All right, so I've got it attached to that end over there. I've got it around the tree over here. You just have to trust me, okay? Now all I do, okay, I'm just going to grab this line and you make a loop. See how my two fingers are through it? And with your two fingers you just grab the line on the moving end, right, and pull it through. Okay, when you do that it makes a loop like that. See? Now this loop, if you do this the wrong way, this loop will never come out. But the loop is going, you know, this side is where the pony knot was in the tree. Okay, so when you're making your loop, you don't grab the side that you've got tied on with just whatever knot, right? You grab the side of the knot that's just looped around the tree and not tied onto the tree, right? You grab like that and pull. Like that. Okay? Then you just take your working end, put it through the eye that you've made, right? Tighten it. And right, make that bend. So all that is, right, you've put it through the little loop you've made, you tighten it a bit, you hold it down with your fingers, and then you just make a loop like that, right? And you're just going to pass the working end through it, right? So I've just put the loop over top, pass it through like that. Trucker's hitch, right? Comes apart. Dead easy. And of course our pony knot over here comes undone very easily as well. Last but not least is the knot I use the least often, which is interesting because if you do a search on YouTube on bushcraft channels, all they ever do is talk about this knot. They call it the king of knots, the knot. I hardly ever need to use it in the woods, right? It's a useful knot if you're tying up to a dock somewhere. And there are applications for using it in the woods, but I find the pony knot and the lark's head just tend to be quicker and easier to tie. So what knot am I talking about here? I'm talking about the Bowline knot, okay? It's basically a fixed loop, right? You want a loop in the end of a line, but you want a loop that you can untie later on, right? It's not, I mean, the easiest way to put a loop on the end of the line is just put an overhand knot, right? And just tighten that. Right, now you've got a loop in the end of the line, easy to make, overhand knot, single overhand knot. The problem is, we put any kind of tension on that, this knot is never coming out, unless you get to work on it with some sort of needle or something, right? Well, it will not come out if you tighten it. So what the Bowline knot allows you to do is put a loop in the end of a line, and it'll come undone most of the time with any sort of thicker string. And I'm going to talk about the kind of rope it doesn't come out of in a minute. But so how do you tie this wonderful knot, right? So you just make a little loop in your line towards yourself. You got a loop like that. And then, just like they say in Cub Scouts, using the tag end, the bunny comes out of the hole, goes around the tree, goes back in the hole. Same way it came out, sort of thing, right? And then you just bend that up a little bit, and there you've got a Bowline knot. Okay, so it's easy to make and it's easy to untie. If you practice doing this, you can do it with your eyes closed after maybe 10, 20, 30 attempts, depends on how quick you learn. Okay, so it's an easy knot to tie. And just because of the way it goes together, it's kind of a unique knot, because this little piece here, all you got to do is push down on it, and it comes apart fairly easily, right? So it's a handy knot, right? Not hard to tie, you can sort of, it's quick to tie. There we go. bowline knot, right? Not hard to do. And it's useful. You want a fixed loop for whatever reason. You got a fixed loop. Look, you know, in the end of this loop, you can make a lark's head, right? So, which most of the time when I see people using a bowline knot, that's what they use it for, right? Right. Where it comes in handy is in nautical applications where you're putting this over a piling on a dock, right? And it can go up and it can go down with the tide and so on and so forth. But if you were, you know, tying up a canoe to shore, you would not use this knot, right? Because it could come loose, right? It's just a little bit different situation. You'd want to use it. I would use a pony knot to tie a canoe onto a shore. You're tying it onto like the branch of a tree, or the base of a tree, which you can't use this for, right? Because the bowline knot's meant to be slipped over things, right? You wouldn't put a string around something and then tie a bowline knot, and you could, right? But I wouldn't. It just doesn't seem to be getting the use out of the knot. So the thing with the bowline knot that I don't like is that if you're using bank line, okay, tarred bank line, which I use a lot, it's actually really hard to get it out. You get a good tight bowline, you put some tension onto it with bank line, it does not want to come out. So it's supposed to be a temporary fixed loop. But if you're using a thinner line like this, it's a permanent fixed loop. You got to cut it, basically cut that end off if you want to use the rope for something else. Especially the good tarred bank line, it's kind of sticky. You know, it's narrow and it's thin and it's sticky. Not really not like glue or anything like that, but it's got a stickiness to it that makes it hold really well when you put knots in it. That's why it's so good for the jam knot. All right, so I've got two alternatives to the bowline knot. You know, if you find, again, it's rare that I need it, but it is sort of an essential, a fixed loop that you can untie is an important thing to have when you need it. When you can't get away with a lark's head, right? Which I find works, well, that's still a constricting loop, I guess. It's like a tightening loop, right? But anyway, if you want a fixed loop that doesn't tighten, that you can untie, that's not a slip knot, alternatives to the bowline knot. Let me see, the simplest one is, just grab a stick here, I'll show you. Or I'll put it in my mouth. All right, so the alternative is that you just make a loop in the line. You make an overhand knot in the line, okay? So now I got an overhand knot here, and I haven't tightened it up yet. Before you tighten it, put a stick in the overhand knot like that. Put a stick in the hole, sort of thing, right? A toggle, right? So now I've got my fixed loop, right? Right, there's your tag end. Working ends in this hand here, right? I can pull on that as hard as I want, yeah, right? It will not give up. It is a fixed loop in the line. Very easy to tie because it's an overhand knot. The first knot you learn how to tie when you're 5, right? Even if I want to untie this thing, I just wriggle the stick out. And now that the actual knot that formed this thing isn't tight, right? Because I had a stick in the middle of the knot. Right, so and there's a lot of knots like that. You can sort of jam a stick into them and it just keeps them from getting so tight that you can't untie them. So that's another way to save your line, right? Let me just show you that again, right? You make a loop, overhand knot in the loop, okay, like that. And before you tighten the overhand knot, you just put a little toggle in, like that. Put a stick in it. Anything will do, right? Okay, now the knot, it's going to hold itself tight, right? It's not going to give up, it's not going to fail. But the knot can't tighten into itself because it's got this stick in the way, right? So it's very easy to untie when you don't want it anymore. All right, so that's one way, alternative to a bowline knot. Just using an overhand knot in a loop with a stick through the overhand knot. Simplest thing ever, right? And that's one of those knots where if you've seen someone do it once, unlike the bowline, when you see someone do a bowline knot, unless you're a very clever person, it's like watching someone do a magic trick. And you have to watch someone do a bowline knot many times, I've found anyway, to learn how to do it easily. And then you have to practice it so you can do it with your eyes closed. And, you know, I would say all 5 of these knots, practice them, you know, on your coffee break or whatever. Everybody's sitting around staring slack-jawed into their smartphones. You know, bring a 6-foot length of, paracord, keep it in your pocket, and whenever you're killing time, instead of, you know, reading, you know, Snapchat or whatever, practice your knots. And you'll find it, 1 week just cycling through these 5 knots I've shown you here, you'll be able to do them all with your eyes closed, right? You can even the ones that seem tricky at first, right? Anyway, that's one alternative to the bowline knot. The other is I'll zoom out a little bit here so you can see from a distance. The other alternative is to, again, you're putting a loop in the line. So what you do is you put a bend in the working end and you reach through that, reach into it and grab the tag end and pull it through. So now I've got sort of like a little, it's like a slip knot, but it's like slipping out. It's the worst slip knot ever, right? It's a slip knot that slips out. So that's not very useful. But then all you do with the tag end is you tie a little half hitch with a bend behind that initial knot. So you get a little loop there. Now you can mend that so it goes away. Okay, like that. All right, so now I've got effectively a fixed loop in the line. Okay, you practice this a couple times. This is very easy to tie. And it's the process for making this knot it's got the same feel to it as making the sort of main knot in the trucker's hitch. All right, so I've got a reliable fixed loop in the line, but when I don't want it anymore, it comes out. Right? You just pull the tag in, pop, it comes out. Right? That's why I say it's like it goes together like the trucker's hitch knot, and it comes apart the same way too. So let me show you that again. So I got a loop like this, and I just pull the tag end through. Okay. So now I've got a loop where the tag end wants to come. Right, the tag end wants to come out. So all you do is you put a little, what some people would call a stop knot, right behind this knot. You just bend it around, do a little half hitch with a little loop like that. Okay, and we can mend that so it goes away. But now we've got basically a fixed loop, right? That we can tighten, pull as hard as we want, right? And then when we don't want any more, out she goes. Right? And it's easy to tie. I mean, I'm not looking at the knot right now while I'm talking to you. You have to believe me. But it's, you can just go by feel tying this knot. There. I mean, they're all easy to tie, but this one is once you've done it a few times, it's got an intuitive feel to it, right? So that's a reliable fixed loop that comes undone when you don't want it anymore. Right, so every knot I've shown you here are knots that come apart when you don't want them anymore very easily. They're all easy to tie. They come in handy for a variety of scenarios, except for the jam knot, which is sort of a permanent knot. But the jam knot's one of those knots that when you need to attach two things together and have them stay forever, right? Like a nail, right? That's where it comes in handy. If you had two things you wanted to nail together, did not want them to come apart. There's other applications for the jam knot, but that's where I tend to use it. If I'm building a ground blind or something like that, that jam knot is the knot. All right, so that's 5 knots that I use. The most frequent knots I use in the order that I tend to need to use them. So that's the pony knot, the jam knot, the lark's head, the trucker's hitch, and last but not least, the bowline knot. Okay, and some variations on the bowline knot that one might argue are easier to use for whatever reason. Certainly more friendly to tarred bank line. Tighten a bowline knot on tarred bank line. Good luck getting it out. Anyway, but the same thing for the trucker's hitch. There's some sorts, so the trucker's hitch, as you saw, pops out very easily. But there's some types of line it won't. Really fluffy cotton-like rope, it tends to be harder to get out. Something slipperier like a nylon or whatever, it's easier to pop it out. But it also comes out of tarred bank line fairly easily because even though it's sticky, it's not cottony, it's slick, right? So anyway, for me, those are the 5 knots. I find it's rare that I need another knot, and that, of course, notwithstanding the overhand knot and the half hitch, which I'll show at the end of the video for those of you that have never heard of those before. And if you haven't, you should have. All right, so I invite your comments. Let me know what you think. If I missed a knot that you think is essential, please make a note in the comments, and maybe I'll make a video talking about why I didn't include it or why I was wrong not to include it. All right, so hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, and until next time, enjoy the outdoors on the cheap. Let me go show you those other 2 knots. Okay, overhand knot, first knot you ever learned as a child. You just have the string, make a circle in the string, put the end of the string through the circle, and tighten. Tighten it too much, it won't come undone. You'll need a little pointy stick or something to get out, right? So it's the most basic knot. If you want to secure it even more, you just do a second one on top of it called the double granny knot, or or double overhand or a granny knot, right? But I find, you use this knot with other moves to make the better, more versatile, slightly more complicated but more versatile knot. So the overhand knot there's very few knots that don't employ some form of overhand knot, right? Many of the knots I just showed you use an overhand knot of some kind, but usually there's like a bend through it, like that, something like that, where it can pop back out, right? Anyway, that's the overhand. Let me show you the half hitch. The half hitch is a very basic knot, very versatile knot. Again, a lot of the knots I showed you today use half hitches in various ways, but even on its own, it's a fairly handy knot. So let's say we've attached a string to a stick like this with an overhand knot. Right, that won't stay on, it'll come loose. I don't care how tight you get that. There's tight, a little bit of stress and the thing comes off. You want to make that knot more reliable, you have your overhand. And an overhand just means a half hitch just means you make a loop like that and put it over. Usually you do 2. Okay, now this is very reliable. Okay, that'll hold. Okay, if you're stressed, if your fingers aren't working, if you've lost your dexterity, you can always make a half hitch, right? But the problem with the half hitch is that it doesn't come apart easily. It doesn't get so tight that you can't undo it, so it can be undone, but it's not quick to untie. It's very quick to tie, right? Let's say your fingers are numb and you need to tie something off, right? It goes on really quick, right? And you don't even need this hand is just being used like a knitting needle almost, right? And it's reliable, it'll hold, but it can take it takes a few seconds to get out, depending on how tight it is. But let's say this gets iced up or something like that. It's a little trickier to get out, right? So anyway, that's the half hitch. Easy knot to do. Lots of resources on the internet to show you how to do those.